benvinguts i moltes gràcies per assistir a aquesta jornada de reflexió, no? I de compartir experiències. Sempre m'agrada començar agraint tota la feina invisible que està al darrere de que qualsevol cosa d'aquestes puguin dur-se a terme. Tenim els traductors allà, que estan començant ja la seva feina. Tenim a la gent que està gravant aquí, enregistrant el vídeo, que es penjarà després per la gent que no pugui assistir. Tenim a la gent que està fora repartint els pinganillos. Tenim ha estat la Maite de Barcelona Activa, l'Àngels, diferents persones ajudant una mica a produir això, des del Pla Estratègic Metropolità, l'Oriol, principal una mica creador d'aquesta jornada, la Lluïsa i segur que més gent de l'equip d'Oriol, Jordi, des de la Diputació, que també està per aquí. Simplement agrair a tothom l'esforç, perquè sense tota aquesta feina invisible no podríem tenir aquesta petita sessió. Sí que no em vull allargar molt, primer perquè tinc la veu molt presa, com podeu veure, i segon perquè venim a escoltar altres persones. Sí que m'agradaria simplement compartir una mica des d'on surt el fer aquest esdeveniment i fer-ho a Barcelona Activa i fer-ho amb el Pla Estratègic Metropolità i amb la Diputació de Barcelona. Jo crec que si som francs, i aquí en aquest entorn de confiança, per dir d'una manera, hem de reconèixer que tots anem una mica perduts en el moment en què estem en termes de polítiques de desenvolupament local. Perduts no per entrar en pànic, de dir no sabem on anem, i ho diu la gent de Barcelona Activa, que són l'agència de desenvolupament local de Barcelona. Sí que sabem què volem fer i cap a on volem anar, però també és veritat que estem en un moment de canvis de paradigmes a molts nivells, estem entomant diferents crisis a la vegada, crisis culturals, polítiques, econòmiques, i el desenvolupament local i les agències de desenvolupament local com a Barcelona Activa són part d'aquest canvi i són part d'aquest moment on hi ha certa desorientació, certes incerteses i a la vegada també certes il·lusions i certes curiositats per recórrer nous camins. I és des d'aquest impuls que acollim aquesta sessió com altres sessions, altres jornades que estem realitzant de diferents àrees. Per tant, simplement us animo des d'aquesta incertesa i curiositat que tots tenem en aquest moment cap a on ha d'anar el desenvolupament local, quines són les noves polítiques de desenvolupament local que poden alumbrar la pròxima dècada, quin és el paper, el rol de les agències de desenvolupament local, que és un debat que s'està donant a diferents indrets. Us animo que hem d'assumir aquesta certa incertesa, aquesta curiositat i a veure si la conversa, i és una mica la hipòtesi de partida, entre Nil i Void, facilitada per Ariadna, ens pot ajudar a inspirar-nos i a anar recopilant inputs en aquest camí. Jo crec que el que no s'ha de paralitzar aquest moment de recerca, sinó que al revés, nos ha d'animar en aquesta una mica sensació d'estar obrint alguns nous camins. A l'hora de parlar de Nil i de Void, perquè crec que pot ser una conversa interessant, si algú m'atrau d'una mica el que he llegit del Nil, perquè personalment l'he conegut avui al dinar, on ja hem tingut un petit i ric debat, és aquesta mirada mirem cap a la desigualtat i mirem cap a l'urbanisme i mirem cap a l'economia i com es relacionen aquests tres elements, que és una mirada absolutament necessària en el desenvolupament local i més que sempre des de les ciutats i de les grans ciutats i les grans àrees metropolitanes. Per tant, el relació entre aquests punts, aquests vèrtexs d'aquest triangle són essencials. Després també ens fixem en la pobresa, però ens fixem també en cap a on va la riquesa, perquè si ens centrem només en què està passant amb la pobresa, ens perdem una part important de la foto i sobretot d'on podem incidir, d'on hem d'incidir precisament per afectar la pobresa, que és en entendre cap a on va la riquesa i què dinàmica segueix. I després aquest interès que té el Nil per tot el que és la innovació socioeconòmica, i aquí lligo una mica amb el meu paper en Barcelona Activa i l'àrea que estem intentant construir, que intenta d'alguna manera posar molt en valor la innovació socioeconòmica i que Nil també dona molta importància des d'una perspectiva també no naïf, de dir, això no es tracta de substituir els serveis públics ni molt menys les administracions, ni tampoc pretendre que això serà la força majoritària del mercat, però sí entendre que molta part del canvi que podem tenir de models de desenvolupament pot venir del paper que puguin jugar aquesta innovació. Però per això hem de parlar de scaling up i d'acceleration, no? Com diu ell. O sigui, com ho escalem tot això cap a sortir de minories, sortir d'espais més endogàmics, cap a grans sectors de població, i per això passa per escalar i per accelerar el creixement d'aquestes entitats, empreses, cooperatives d'innovació socioeconòmica. I per últim, m'agrada aquestes preguntes que se'm fa en torno al model econòmic, i em diu, com seria un model econòmic basat en generar en mètriques de salut o en mètriques de felicitat, si es pot parlar d'això, o com seria un model econòmic centrat en la resiliència i no tant en el creixement? Són preguntes que reconec, com al principi, que no tenim la resposta, però tenim la pregunta per anar recorrent camí. I amb Void ja havien coincidit ja en temes relacionats amb les economies col·laboratives, intentant posar en marxa algun projecte, també amb companys i companyes d'emprenedoria d'aquí a Barcelona Activa. Crec que és una conversa molt interessant la que poden plantejar Void i Nil. Jo crec que Void també està mirant cap a una disrupció que tenim al desenvolupament local i al model econòmic, molt relacionada amb el que podria ser el sharing economy, el green economy, i m'agafo sobretot a una de les parts que ens fa sortir a tots una mica de la zona de confort, perquè és un terreny que no desconegut i delicat i perillós, no? Que és com afecta això al món del treball, com afecta això al món del valor distribuït, quin paper juguen allà aquí les plataformes. I crec que és una mirada molt necessària també en aquest nova etapa i canvi de cicle. Per tant, em sembla una combinació perfecta per a aquesta conversa. I Ariadna, d'Alternatives Econòmiques, una cooperativa de comunicació intentant obrir un camí que no és difícil, que és el periodisme econòmic des d'una perspectiva diferent i que segur que amb moltes dificultats però allà estan lluitant per aconseguir-ho. Jo soc subscriptor i lector i us agraeixo la feina molt i recomano a tot el que no conegui que entri a la web i conegui Alternatives Econòmiques. I per últim, Oriol, moltíssimes gràcies per haver-nos donat l'oportunitat de participar, de col·laborar en aquesta jornada. Oriol ens coneixíem d'abans, jo una mica en aquest moment des de fora de l'administració, ell des de la Diputació de Barcelona. Una de les persones des de l'administració que porta anys donant voltes, intentant conèixer què és el que hi ha a nivell internacional, què és el que hi ha, quins pensadors, quines pràctiques, quins projectes poden obrir nous camins, noves formes de fer desenvolupament local. I per tant, per molts de nosaltres ha sigut un dels canals per a conèixer allò que ens podia inspirar en aquest camí que estem recorrent i que ara està en el pla estratègic de l'àrea metropolitana. Es va fer aquesta proposta i una mica quasi a ulls tancats vam dir endavant, segur que simplement si té el segell de l'Oriol és que té sentit. Gràcies a tothom i esperem que sigui inspirador.
Moltes gràcies a tothom per venir, moltes gràcies a les persones que intervindran perquè han demostrat molt d'entusiasme per participar en aquest acte. Jo simplement us volia parlar dels tres elements que crec que reuneixen aquest acte en relació amb el Pla Estratègic Metropolità de Barcelona i amb l'ADN del que volem que sigui el Pla Estratègic Metropolità de Barcelona. En primer lloc, estem parlant d'un espai que vol ser un espai de col·laboració i per tant el fet ja de plantejar amb aquest acte la col·laboració amb Barcelona Activa, amb la Direcció d'Altres Economies i amb la Diputació de Barcelona, bàsicament a través de l'Oficina Tècnica d'Estratègies de Desenvolupament Econòmic, doncs ja he intentat ser una mostra d'això. En aquest cas han sigut aquests agents, aquestes institucions per diferents circumstàncies, fins i tot de tipus logístic i operatiu, però esperem que fins i tot aquest mateix acte serveixi per reforçar feina que s'està fent en aquest sentit de repensar les economies locals des de l'àrea metropolitana mateix, amb tot el procés de la taula de reactivació econòmica o des de la planificació estratègica de l'àrea, des d'altres institucions. Per tant, la col·laboració com a primer element fonamental del pla estratègic. El segon és l'esperit de diàleg, i això és precisament el que tindrem avui, un diàleg conduït per l'Ariadna Trilles, però en principi és un diàleg entre dues visions de les economies locals, no necessàriament entreposades i no necessàriament coincidents en molts temes. Ho hem vist ara en el dinar, que ja hem començat una mica el debat i contrastar les visions. Només per afegir amb el que deia l'Àlvaro sobre l'interès d'aquest diàleg, dir que per una banda tenim el Neil McInroy, que és una persona que ens està replantejant des del Center for Local Economic Strategies de Manchester capgirar una mica la mirada que fem sobre les economies locals per no veure només els problemes i dels barris i de les comunitats, sinó identificar quins són els seus actius i treballar per posar-los en valor. Jo crec que això és molt interessant des del punt de vista de les formes de treball i de les eines amb les que ens dotem per treballar. I per un altre, el Boyd Cohen, que és algú que ve d'Illinois, que després de voltar per mig món s'estableix a Barcelona i que diu que això és millor que el Silicon Valley. Per tant, necessàriament hem de poder saber en què es basa per dir això i contrastar-ho amb les visions que tenen altres persones. Finalment, l'Ariadna Trilles, també, com deia l'Àlvaro, que ve d'un mitjà que ens està ajudant a molts a entendre realment a la gent. Jo soc economista, però a vegades tampoc entenc l'economia, com funciona, però en general ens ajuda a alternatives econòmiques i la tasca de l'Ariadna a entendre això. Per tant, hi ha un diàleg entre diferents visions, entre diferents perspectives, és el que intentarem també fer amb una petita fila zero que hem organitzat per introduir, per començar amb el debat, i esperem que això sigui prou ric. I per últim, pla estratègic, visió de futur, per tant, les economies locals del futur, com ha de ser l'economia local del futur, i això implica necessàriament repensar. I aquí ho teniu, repensar, en aquest cas, el desenvolupament econòmic local, repensar les polítiques locals de promoció econòmica, repensar les nostres eines, les nostres formes de fer, com deia, el diàleg que establirem o que s'establirà aquí en l'escenari ens ho facilitarà. Per tant, poca cosa més, convidar-vos a participar, convidar-vos a ser actius i actives en el diàleg que hi haurà després de la seva xerrada, i teniu aquí el hashtag de Twitter, que sigueu actius i actives a Twitter també, i sobretot que, òbviament, abans parlàvem que això no és el final del començament, sinó el començament del final, sinó el final del començament, i per tant que ara hem de començar a treballar a partir de jornades com aquesta i pels processos amb els que estem tots i totes, perquè estic segur que els diferents ajuntaments, les diferents organitzacions, les diferents empreses en les que esteu cadascun de vosaltres teniu aquesta necessitat de repensar. Res més, és el temps del diàleg. Moltes gràcies.
Us han presentat els ponents ja, però m'agradaria dir algunes paraules sobre el que fan. I'll start by Neil McInroy. He's the Chief Executive of the Center for Local Economic Strategies in Manchester. He's based in Manchester, but he's Scottish. You'll see immediately. And he's considered to be one of the most influential people in local government, so it's a pleasure to learn about his work. And this center is the United Kingdom leading independent charitable research organization. I had the opportunity to read the conclusions of the work he's been working on in 10 different cities of the United Kingdom, Birmingham, Manchester, many of them, in which, you'll tell us about it, but I like a lot the name when you say creating good city economies. I would like to know what good city economies are. And then we have Boyd Cohen. Thank you for being here. You're a professor at the Business School in Spain, but most of all, you're a leader in entrepreneurship, innovation, smart cities, and sustainability. He wrote a couple of books. He's the co-author of Climate Capitalism, and now, most recently, he wrote The Emergence of Urban Entrepreneur, which highlights on three main elements to, if I'm not wrong, to attract the talented and creative people, like urbanization, democratization, collaboration. So
you read the book?
Some of it. And I think that we could start with the general question, maybe you could tell us about the good city economies, because that's a concept that I don't know if everybody would agree about.
Surely.
For a start.
Yeah,
And
that's a hard one. That's a hard one to start. Well, I think my organisation, for many years, we're 30 years old, and for many years we've done the orthodox economic development approaches, the inward investment strategies, the sector growth, the employment strategies. And I think over recent years, maybe in the last 10 years, realised, come on here, this stuff is not working very well. Poverty remains, inequality is getting worse, and there's a sense that it's not working within the limits of the environment. You can't keep growing and growing. But they're not Kenneth Boulding, the economist, that said, the only people that believe in growth, the only people that believe in continuous growth are lunatics and economists. So there's a need to rethink the system and create a good economy. And that's where we've been doing the last 10 years. We think what a good economy look like. An economy that works for people, an economy that doesn't serve itself but serves the people in the place. And optimistically, this is not a difficult job, because wherever you go, there's a range of social, community, energy, which is starting to foreshadow what a good city economy would look like. It's co-ops, it's mutuals, it's innovators, it's alternative finance, it's urban food production, it's a whole array, many people playing many different instruments, playing lots of lovely music in our cities. The problem we have, it's not yet a symphony, and it's not yet there at the scale to provide what will be a good economy moving forward. So we've got all the bits in place. We just need to accelerate and scale it up. And we are all in a kind of a zone of transition. Do you understand that? Kind of paradigm shift. And we're in the midst of it. And we're building a new type of economy, a new type of society, it seems to me. And I will say finally, I say we're cursed and lucky. We're cursed because of climate change, poverty, growing economic instability. We're cursed. But we're lucky because all of us are part of a new movement which can build better city economies, a more inclusive economy, and we can build something that's more socially just than it's went in the past. So we're cursed, but we should always think that we're also lucky because we're building something quite special. And wherever I go, I have miserable moments. I'm a Scot. But what gets me out of bed in the morning, what makes me smile, is all the great energy we see in cities. We just need to scale a lot of that up.
You sound like a politician.
Yeah, but I do things.
It's very inspiring.
But I do things.
Yeah. Okay.
Neil for Prime Minister.
Is this the same idea you have about when you think about good city economies?
Yeah, I mean, we had a very interesting debate over lunch with a group of local experts here over the last couple hours, and I think we discovered that we have quite a lot in common and very little we disagree with, which makes this less entertaining. So we decided we're going to try to artificially create some animosity between us. So we're going to work on that if we can, with your help. But I guess Oriol originally contacted me out of sort of hearing about my latest research project, which was my book on the emergence of the urban entrepreneur. And that certainly had a different angle than what Neil just presented. But in terms of our philosophies about where we think cities are going around the economy, I think we're very aligned. My book is about how entrepreneurship and innovation is becoming very urban, and that there's a lot of ripple effects that are emerging around cities around the world because of this, and that there are three converging factors, which you named, that are actually driving this shift to urban innovation entrepreneurship. And those three that identify are the very fact of urbanization. So we all know this, 1.3 million people around the world are moving to cities every week. But what we don't talk enough about is what implications that has for infrastructure, for quality of life in these cities, for the people that already live there and the new people arriving who expect equal or better housing, equal or better public transit, equal or better access to energy, equal or better access to food. And what we're finding is that there's this whole new breed of entrepreneur that I call civic entrepreneur, who's actually not worried about consumer needs, but actually worried about citizen needs and trying to innovate around solving those things in ways that historically we used to think was the responsibility of the city or the state. And now we're seeing these hybrid models where citizens or entrepreneurs or a private sector getting involved with improving quality of life in their cities. And that leads to the other, one of the other areas, which is collaboration, and that we're seeing a lot of new collaborative models emerging in cities. So one is collaborative business models between the private sector. You look at things like our bike sharing in Barcelona, car sharing, and many other services like that, where the private sector is playing a more active role in provision of services we used to think were really city responsibility. So there's collaborative models that are actually expanding, not just private sector and public sector, but also universities getting involved, and citizen groups by themselves are participating. I actually call this the 5P. So we used to talk about 3 Ps, which is public-private partnerships. I call public-private people, professor, because I'm a professor, partnerships. And then we have the collaborative economy, which is a really interesting debate, and one we're having very actively here in Catalunya and in Paris and in Berlin and New York City. What does sharing economy mean for our cities, and how should we regulate it? How can we incent the right behavior or discourage the negative behavior of companies and players in the sharing economy? So that's the other part of collaborative. And finally, there's democratization. And this is fascinating from an urban perspective, because over the last 20 years, we've seen the cost and the tools of innovation have changed. So there's a quote in my book that from an investor in Silicon Valley that said in the 1990s, it took $2.5 million to bring a tech product to market. He says in the 2000s, that came down to $250,000. The reason that did was because servers went to the cloud, so startup companies didn't have to have their own servers. We have new software tools like software as a service you can rent. You don't have to develop your own software. And then he says now as we head into 2015 and beyond, it looks like we're heading towards $250 to bring a tech product to market. Now we can all disagree about whether that's the right amount it takes to bring a product to market. The point is, it's exponentially declining, and the tools to innovate in our cities are becoming more accessible to more people. So we have methodologies like the Lean Startup, which help us learn how to experiment faster, not spend as much money. We have co-working spaces. Barcelona has more than 300 co-working spaces in the city. We have Fab Labs. In fact, here in Barcelona was birthed the idea of Fab Cities, which is now moving towards this idea of, can we by 2030 or so have 50% of all our everything we consume in the city be produced in the city? So all of these things, because of all these tools, are becoming more accessible to more people.
You've been talking about Fab Labs, co-working, but I was wondering to where, and this makes me think about smart cities too, and I was wondering to what extent it is related to real problems that people have, because sometimes I think that if you don't have access to housing, or if you don't, you know what I mean inequality, we suffer from lots of problems, and sometimes it's as if we were talking about something that is just of progressive minority, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely, and I think there's one thing, I'm going to slightly disagree with Boyd, well, not disagree, but certainly put an addition to it. I think there is this social innovation. Roberto Unger, a Brazilian philosopher and politician, talks about social innovation not just from the civil society, not just from the social society, or social sector rather, but the commercial and public sectors too. And he says that social innovation needs to percolate through, so businesses need to become more social and innovate accordingly, as does public authorities, as well as civil society needs to innovate. And we need to be very wary of this social innovation label and some of the way it's being expressed, because, and I don't want to make false, I think it's a great agenda, but the worry for me is it's hipsters, it's seen as trendy. Social innovation and creativity is preserve of humankind. We've all got those qualities, and we need to universalise social innovation. And I was at a Royal Society for the Arts I'm glad this isn't getting filmed and going back to England. The Royal Society for Arts, it's an esteemed UK body, and I was in London, and they were talking about social innovation to address poverty. Yeah, good topic. But nobody was really talking about some of the innovative stuff that has went on years ago. So at one point I put my hand up and said, wouldn't be the greatest social innovation we could do is to put a penny on income tax and redistribute it to the poor. Seems to me we have to be very wary that some of the social innovation is kind of being seen as this alternative, creative, imaginative, wacky stuff. I think there's some social innovation that's in our history, and we should be thinking about that. And also social innovation is something that should also be in the commercial and public world too. So there is just we're in the very early doors, the foothills of making a new system and the new ways we think about governance, economy, and society more generally. And we need to be wary that we don't allow this to be just another faction, another alternative. We need to mainstream it, and social innovation needs to be mainstreamed, not the preserve of some creative hipster types. It's for everyone.
Anything to say to that?
Oh, it's 2 comments. I do agree. I think, although I would say if it becomes cool to be a social innovator and it's hip to be one, I don't think that's a bad thing. When, like, I'm come from the U.S. and what's many places still is hip to trying to become a billionaire entrepreneur, and I think what we're finding is a shift even amongst the hipsters, if you will, of aspiring to be a multi-millionaire entrepreneur. Not that that's bad or that or only negative, but my point is I think we're seeing a growing number of the masses of people, the creative types as well, trying to figure out how they can use their creativity to innovate in their local communities in ways that actually will add value to their community. If that's hip and cool, I think we're halfway to the right direction. And then the question is, how do we get the lower income people to be able to participate in this new innovation engine that cities are offering? And in my book, I talk a lot about the importance of new forms of educational pedagogy for youth, particularly in uneducated or lower income neighborhoods. And this is happening around the world, and we've seen it here in the Innovation District in 22 is the idea, well, initially it started as STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math education, to give the basic science tools to all children so they could be part of innovation in the science community. But now it's evolved to something that some people are calling STEAM, which is entrepreneurship, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So now you have culture, science, innovation tools. You make that accessible to children, even in low-income communities, from a very early age, and they will be able to participate more actively in the social innovation and innovation communities in our cities. And I think that's super important so that all the people don't get left behind. And this ties into something we had the debate about on earlier at lunch, which is what's happening around the future work. And if Industry 4.0 is arriving, and we know it is, and if the freelance economy is taking off, and we know it is, and if the future is probably way less about having a job for life or for many years from one company, then what we need to be doing is preparing all our citizens, low income, middle, and older and elderly, to be more able to participate in freelance projects and building their skill sets across a diversity of areas so they can participate in active, vibrant community cooperatives and participate in ways that they can generate value that can then be shared and accrued in some way. Well, I want to come back to one thing on the smart cities thing. It's very fascinating. It actually ties a lot into something Neil said at lunch and about his good economies thing, which is about smart cities and and you asked about whether there's a disconnect. A colleague of mine and I interviewed 30 people at the Smart Cities Expo. I've been going to Smart City Expo for 5 years straight. And it's been an evolution in the discourse and dialogue at the Smart Cities Expo. It was very top-down, technology-driven for the first few years. And the last few years, we're starting to see this grassroots, bottom-up thing, right to the city, circular economy discussions. And my friend and I, we went around as a colleague in design thinking. We decided to say, if the ultimate goal of a city, and therefore of all the meaningful actions the city engages in, is to make quality of life better and make citizens happy, then smart cities in the end is actually about making citizens happier, supposedly. So we decided to actually interview on video. We're going to come out with a 2-minute video, Buzz. Very interesting. We decided to interview technologists at the Smart City Expo. So we interviewed Philips, we interviewed Microsoft, but these were people. We didn't interview them as their company. We asked them if we could interview them as a person who happened to represent technology companies. We asked them one question: what makes you happy living in your city? That was the only question we asked them. Our hypothesis was not one of them would even mention technology. And guess what? Not one of them did. We're talking to the technologists at the Smart City Expo, and when they are asked to personally respond to what makes them happy in a city, technology doesn't even enter their head. So what I think that means to me is that we're seeing a shift in the understanding of what the role of cities are and what things like smart cities are. So now we're starting to see people realizing, even in the tech sector, that what we need to do with smart city is we need to focus on what makes people happy and then figure out how technology might be of assistance to achieve that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just, again, I think what's very important here is the platform or the soil conditions or that allow the new system, the new urbanism to emerge. And one thing we should never ever forget, and I think sometimes we can get dazed by the possibilities of new technology and the creative energy of people, is that the fundamental problems we have here, and I've just spent time the last few days being in Barcelona and looking around Barcelona, clearly this is a very wealthy city, but you've got a lot of poor people in it. And it seems to me that poverty and deprivation is very poor soil conditions for innovation and creativity. And until we actually think about innovation in terms of how do we innovate around wealth, who has it, where does it go, and who has what vehicles we have to harness wealth, we're not going to see the fruits that could come from a smart city or the innovative future we require. So I think a priori, there's some fundamental questions we need to look at in terms of where money goes, who owns the money. We need to have, and that's why I'm very for local banks, alternative finance, credit unions, cooperatives, different mechanisms where the wealth, opposed to being singular or owned by one or two people, or people shareholders who don't even live here, or very rich people who live in the Cayman Islands. We want that wealth to be locked in for local people. And so there's a range of institutions and different forms we can use to achieve that. And that seems to be fundamentally important a priori for a true innovative future, a better city which is also socially just and inclusive. Because the danger, of course, is that we think we can solve the problems through innovation generally, is it's dancing on the head of a pin. Yeah? We'll have the same economic system, the same injustices, and we'll add on a little bit of innovation, or we'll add on a little bit of something that's a bit progressive. That's not going to be good enough. We need to look fundamentally at wealth, where it is and who gets it. And even in this great city and in many others, we can see the problems of wealth. We see the problems of gentrification. We see the problems of concentration of wealth in the inner core. We see the problems how it's not trickling out to the outer areas. We've got an economic model, an agglomeration model, which is not working effectively for all of Barcelona. And that's a problem. That needs a new economic model, a different economic model for Barcelona, which is not based on agglomeration. It's based on community wealth building.
Yeah, that's something that surprised me about the work you did. It's when you say you have to learn to say no as a city. I understand that sometimes we are just dreaming that the big corporate comes to our city and says, I'm going to invest I don't know how many millions and I will create hundreds of jobs and that will be our solution. But it's not the point. I mean, sometimes, so could you elaborate on this? Because I was surprised because we are always so, interested in foreign investment and things like that.
I'm not against foreign investment, and I'm not against inward investment. But what I do think is a race to the bottom. And I'm fortunate I go to many different cities and probably see too many economic strategies for my liking. But anyway, incentive competition is a race to the bottom. Because whatever you do to try and land a bit of global capital, there'll be somebody else doing it, and they'll be doing it cheaper, in terms of cheaper labour costs or something cheaper than you are. Incentive competition is fine, and let's do it, and it might be attractive to you for other reasons beyond cheapness, but actually it's a kind of race to the bottom. And that's why growing from within is a much more attractive prospect, I think. And we need to have a balance between inward investment strategies and growing from within, the energy that's there, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the small businesses, all that needs to be built massively at the same time as an inward investment strategy, which is a race to the bottom. And you know, I despair sometimes when I go to some post-industrial cities and they're sitting there and they're not that rich and they're saying, we need to get some inward investment in. And you're thinking, don't even bother, because you can't compete because you're too skint and you've not got enough money to create sweeteners and incentives to get the global economy to land here. It's not going to land here. You're going to have to build from what you've got. Also, I talk in the publication about a phrase called boom goggling, which we say in Scotland, when you've got the beer goggles, this is not going to translate well. It's when you've had 2 or 3 beers and you want more and more and more. Yeah, so you get the beer goggles on.
We understand.
Yeah. Well, it made me think about boom goggles. It's like you think with these pair of spectacles on that you're just one inward investment away from a big boom. You're just one piece of signature building away from a big boom. You're just one Olympic Games from another boom. Yeah, it's a myopia. It's a thing we need to get off in economic development. The boom never comes the way you expect, and also the way the global economy is, you're not going to get a boom. What we're going to have is to look much more of the wealth we have and much more of a steady state situation, and that requires a completely different reimagination of the economic and social model. If Barcelona was not growing, if it was steady state, how are you going to organise your economy and society on that basis? You cannot say to the poor anymore, we'll get some more growth and you'll get the jobs. You can't say that because you won't have growth. So you need to completely reconfigure how you would think about the economic and social model. And why? You may as well start now, because 2 or 3 or 4% growth rates are not that great anyway. You may as well start thinking about a different economic and social model that looks much more within the place and distributes and pluralizes the wealth accordingly.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, there's a competition among cities to become, to attract people, talented people working there, like you here in Barcelona. And I don't know, maybe there's a contradiction between just trying to focus on your city or maybe just have a global mind and studying what's going on all over the world. You've been in many cities and you've been doing this benchmarking with among them, and I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. I actually would even go further than Neil in some respect, because I do agree with you that a lot of my work is somewhat similar to Richard Florida in the sense that it actually explores how cities can become attractive to innovators and entrepreneurs from outside the city to want to move in. I still believe that's valuable, because having fresh, new ideas from people from other parts of the world can be really interesting to a community. And we have found, the research finds that cities that have more immigrants have better rates of innovation and entrepreneurship than cities that are putting walls around themselves. So this is an interesting debate for the alt-right movement, who are anti-immigrant at the national level, that it's actually counterproductive to growing innovation in your community to not allow outsiders in. But I'd even go further in a way to what Neil's saying about being less focused on inward investment. I'm also thinking that in the future, and even in the present, cities need to be more focused on encouraging and promoting entrepreneurship and innovation that actually solves local problems. So right now we find in a lot of economic development circles, and every time I go around talking about these kinds of concepts, I hear this, which is what I heard from, was it Oriol who mentioned this, how I wrote an article about why well, actually I was interviewed in Vanguardia and I talked about how Barcelona might be a better place than Silicon Valley for innovators and entrepreneurs, and it sounds kind of shocking, but there's a couple reasons I make that argument. One is that increasingly innovators and entrepreneurs are interested in urban lifestyles and walkability. I'm from the US, and I can tell you, we don't do that well in the US. Any of you who've been to Silicon Valley could confirm Silicon Valley is about the antithesis of anywhere on this planet to walkable and urban. And even less so if you want to talk about inclusive. There's no place for lower middle income people, which means there's no musicians and artists living in Silicon Valley. Also, there's no walkability. You can't walk to restaurants and cultural activities. It requires a car. And there's no urban life in Silicon Valley. I've been there many times. When people say we want to be the Silicon Valley of Europe or Spain or whatever, I say you are asking the wrong question. You don't need to ask the question, how can we be more like Silicon Valley? Because nobody wants to be like Silicon Valley anymore. In fact, people that live and work in Silicon Valley, including tech companies like Twitter, have moved from Silicon Valley into San Francisco, which is causing all kinds of gentrification problems. But that's another topic. But what I'm trying to say is that economic development still, I find at the local level, tends to be still focused, if it's not focused on inward investment, it's focused on how can we facilitate and foster a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem that generates a lot of venture capital investment and massive exports. And I think that model is dying too for a lot of reasons. That model is dying because we're moving to a democratized world where innovation and entrepreneurship doesn't require venture capital like it used to. If you can bring a tech product to market for $250, you don't need venture capital. If you have access to crowdfunding, I talk about this case from this guy who spent a few $100s on building this prototype and put it on Kickstarter and made $13 million in pre-sales on the project, never raised venture capital, never had employees. So when we think of economic development locally, what are indicators? Venture capital investment from our startup community, number of jobs created. Well, how do you define all these makers, and Barcelona has a lot of them, that are actually innovating and creating, selling their stuff on Etsy or in local communities. But they're actually, or they're recycling in the circular economy locally. They're not necessarily creating a lot of jobs and not raising any venture capital. So I think we need to change our paradigm about what local economic development is and what we want to encourage in our entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem. I think we want to start encouraging more what the Fab City model is about, which was born here in Barcelona, which is the idea that 50% of everything that would be consumed in this city by 2030 would actually be produced in this city. You start thinking about that, and then you think about what governments can do to actually, and you mentioned it earlier in our lunch about things like how can we change our thinking around procurement? Well, a lot of cities are looking at procurement for innovation now as a concept. So we had in Barcelona the BCN Open Challenge. 6 problems identified by the city, a fixed budget to solve them, but no predetermined specifications to what the solution should look like. Why? Because the city is not likely to be the best innovator or the one who has the vision of how to most efficiently innovate this problem. So we need to do procurement for innovation. We need to do participatory budgeting. Paris just announced a few months ago that 5% of their annual budget will be allocated to participatory budgeting, where the citizens participate. We have programs like in Boston, the New Urban Mechanics, where they say, you know what? We as a city are not always going to know what our problems are or how to solve them. So what we're going to do is open an office for civic innovators. Remember, I talked about civic entrepreneurs before. Civic entrepreneurs to come to our office, say, look, we have this problem in our neighborhood. I've come up with an idea to solve it. What do you think about it? If this office, which works for the mayor, thinks they're onto something, this is a real problem, and they have a real possible solution, they let them test their solution on a part of the city. They call it like this, treating the city as a living laboratory. And if it works, they help them scale that solution to the whole city. And furthermore, they say, if it works at the city level, we'll help you get open doors to other cities that might have the same problem. Where am I going with all this? Rather than allocating precious dollars that cities use to try to encourage entrepreneurship, which might be outward focused on exporting, building games. We have that in Barcelona. Here in this building, actually, we have a game accelerator. That's fine. But why not put more of our resources to encouraging entrepreneurs and innovators to solve local urban problems, and that becomes our economic development strategy, rather than trying to create a bunch of startups that will build tech to sell to some other place in the world.
So you need local governments to work very closely with the entrepreneurs and local authorities. I mean, the networking is very important to have.
Surely, and I think, as I said earlier, is that innovation needs to percolate through our public authorities and public institutions. And in the UK, what's happened in the economic development planning profession, I suppose, the economic development profession, is that it's become much more about enabling others to do and allowing platforms for others to do things rather than doing it oneself. So there is something about public bodies and public institutions who think more about enabling rather than delivering, who think more about supporting and nurturing rather than showing. There's a different type of public institution and behaviour of civil servants, I think, in this new world. And it goes back to my earlier point about Roberto Unger, where he sees social innovation as being deeply part of the way people think and do across commercial, public and social sectors. Can I come back to the bit about creative class, which I think is a fascinating debate actually, in this Richard Florida idea where cities need this so-called creative people who can come in and be instigators and catalysts for change. And it was very, very influential, that work, and in my view far too over-influential, because there's some places that will never attract those people, first and foremost. So what do? Because they're not attractive. The Welsh valleys or the post-industrial town that can't attract the so-called creative class. And also, the creative class were an elite. They tend to act in very non-social ways and lived in ghettos in some of those cities too, and were part of the gentrification process. The extent to which they become wedded into the social and cultural architecture of the place was questionable. So I think Richard Florida's got a lot to answer for in some of the work he did in terms of the creative class. And also, it gets me angry a little bit, because who's to say there's a creative class? Surely the poor person who lives in a town or neighbourhood has just got the same capacity to be creative as a so-called creative. The problem is they don't have the opportunity to be creative, because they're poor. So unless you deal with the fundamental basis to the conditions of people, we're knackered when it comes to questions of creativity, because we need to allow people the opportunity or the fertile soil for them to be creative. So I think we need to look, again, what I'm saying is look more eternally, look at our own population. Creativity is not something you import, it's something that we all have as human beings. We need to unleash that within our population. And you're not going to do that if the conditions for them to be creative are not there already. And it's the same with innovation. Innovation's in us all. We need to allow people the opportunity to be innovative. That's why I go back again to the story around wealth and this, where is it and who has it? We need to have new means to harness wealth in our cities. Not in maybe the old redistribution method, but certainly in terms of the ownership and the plurality of where wealth is and who gets it.
Mm-hmm. Any comment about the creative or?
Yeah, obviously, Richard Florida's work is very controversial now for some of the reasons he's argued. In fact, I had a chance to read his next book, which isn't published yet. Yeah. He gave it to me as a sort of to review it, and he's addressing the particularly gentrification issue of the creative class conundrum. But I would actually say I understand your point, but I do disagree to some extent in the sense that I agree that everyone has the capability to be creative, and that's actually why I argue in my book about this educational thing being very important, to educate young people, including from lower income communities, to be able to participate in innovation as they grow up. And actually, I was at the Smart City Expo. I met a city from Israel that has this really cool program to teach lean startup and design thinking methodology to all the youth in their public education system, and that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I do believe everyone has a potential to be creative, but the only thing I want to go back to on this is throughout time we have found that innovators and entrepreneurs are frequently migrants. And sometimes that has happened because of necessity, because sometimes they are outsiders when they arrive in the community. They don't have the network to get a job because their dad knows somebody, and they're forced to be innovative because they don't have an alternative. And in general, I think what we find around the world is a shrinking place in a lot of cases. She mentioned this. I've lived in about 12 cities in the last 15, 20 years in about 6 countries. And that is very enriching to me as an individual, and I hope, as she alluded to, we'll find out as I stay here long term. Maybe you'll kick me out of Barcelona, but I hope that actually means I'm bringing something unique to Barcelona, because I do have this sort of rich diversity of experience living abroad and seeing what has worked and not worked in other cities, and say, maybe we could learn from what I saw. I just moved from Santiago. Maybe there's something we could learn from Santiago in Barcelona, and we've seen that happen, the diffusion of innovation, even sort of more frugal, not expensive innovation. Where did the bus rapid, anybody, raise your hand, where did bus rapid transit originate from? BRT. Where did it come from? Brazil, Curitiba. It didn't come from Silicon Valley. It didn't come from New York City. It didn't come from Berlin. It didn't come from London. It came from a developing city in a developing country. And then guess what? BRT is now a viable system in about 120 cities now, I think, including probably 25 developed countries. The Medellin Transcable thing, that's now a world-famous innovation to allow social inclusion for lower-income people living in rural mountainous areas, came from Medellin, Colombia, not from Vancouver, which has mountainous areas too. So my point is, what we're seeing, and a good friend of mine, his name is Jed Brugman, he wrote a book in 2009 called Welcome to the Urban Revolution. And in that book, he details how increasingly the world is basically an interconnected set of cities more than a bunch of nation states. And that innovation is diffusing from one city to another and hopping not just within a country, not from Barcelona to Madrid. It's just as likely we do something innovative in Barcelona. Let's take 22@, 22@. That was started here. One of the first places it was replicated was Buenos Aires, Argentina, and then Boston. I don't even think Madrid still has an innovation district. Maybe they do, but my point is, innovation is diffusing across the world. And how is that happening? And many of these things are actually improving quality of life. The bus rapid transit is a great example of a solution that improves the quality of life for millions of people in Bogota, for example. Just one city. And that innovation diffusion happens because we have migration of people who are experiencing successful solutions in one city and figuring out how to adapt them to others. So I think we need a blend of raising up the local community and helping them become creators and innovators, but not putting walls around our city and saying we don't want immigrants because they're bad for our society or whatever, and value immigrants because they can contribute to an improved quality of life and help introduce new solutions to the city.
Just on that, I think it's a good point, but I think we need to make a distinction between migration, which I think is a good creative force, and the creative class. There's a clear distinction there.
Yeah.
Migration of creative class were a kind of elite or upper middle class who went to places to be the creators. Migration clearly does that, and it's interesting. I was in Fondo, if I'm saying that correct, this morning, and of course we've got quite a number of new migrants in that part of the city, and it seems to me that is a seed, and this is my point as well, a seed of some great creative energy in terms of cultural industries, in terms of links to people around the world that you may not have links with, in terms of supply chains from lots of different communities around Spain that they could serve as well. There's a whole range of energy there, which if you were following a creative class or an inward investment or the particular idea of innovation, you wouldn't see that. You might think, oh, that's just migrants come in. That's nothing to do with innovation. That's nothing to do with the creative class. That's nothing to do with the future. They're just here. Yeah, they'll move on and into the real economy in some way. No, that is the energy. Go with that. The future economic development, the future social development of that part of Barcelona is fundamentally related to the people that are there and the creativity that's in there and the cultural economy that can be grown from it. And that needs to be recognised, celebrated, and going for. And I have the same problem in the UK. England particularly is a beautifully multicultural place and are fantastic. Many of the cities, Leicester, its majority is ethnic minority. An English city which is 53% ethnic minority population. Fantastic. It's a brilliant place, and I love England for it, even though I'm a Scot. But one of the things that does get me angry is when I go to Birmingham and the economic planner says, oh, what with the creative class and inward investment and all that. I'm saying, creative class? You've got 120 different people around the world in this city, yeah? You've got cultural industries and creative industries coming out of your ears. Why on earth are you focusing on this trendy stuff? You've got the beauty in your own place. You've got social capital that some cities would die for. That's your energy. Go with that. Stop looking for the boom. Stop looking for the new thing. It's the people, yeah? And it seems to me there's a need, not around walls, around places, but we need to look much more at the energies that we have and going with the grain of the energy we have. What Barcelona can do is going to be different to what Portland can do or Manchester can do. And there has been in economic development planning a conformity, a singular way of how your success story, yeah, Olympic Games, look at that, and civic boosterism, urban entrepreneurialism, agglomeration economics. There's these almost articles of faith that sees what cities are about. Cities' future is much more about what the assets and capabilities and cultural and social milieu of that place. That's where enduring strength will come from, because you're not making something that's artificial. And it's also more resilient, because in times of stress, the company that's only here for the incentives won't be going away. Yeah, you'll have an embedded, intrinsic, rooted economy that's based in the social and context of your place.
And what's the answer when you say that?
The answer is an economic planning approach which is both reflective of international trends but builds on the people and the culture and the assets and the activity much more that's here, and ensure that you're creating models of finance and fiscal measures which assure that ensure that a lot more of your wealth is retained in Barcelona for Barcelona people.
Mm-hmm. I would like to know your view about the financial system. You mentioned ethical banking and as an initiative. How could we turn these initiatives into something taken seriously? I mean, I often hear this is nice to have, but as a complementary thing, not the mainstream thing. And it's the same with cooperatives and social economy. I mean, how can you turn this, to stop being just things at the margins and become mainstream?
I would say quickly that in my work, in my own organisation's work, we see these sorts of things as the new mainstream. We've stopped calling them alternative. They're the new mainstream because they work better than what we have. Your credit union, your local bank, your co-ops manage to provide the service or activity just as well, by and large, but the wealth doesn't go away to somewhere else, it sticks locally. They work better, yeah? The problem is that the orthodoxies around the professions don't see them as working better, but they are the new mainstream. It's not when, no, it's not if, sorry, it's not if it's going to happen, it's just a matter of when. And my organisation's job, as all our jobs should be, is to try and ramp these up massively, as fast as we can, because we've got global warming, we've got massive inequality, we've got poverty problems. We need to ramp them up really, really fast, yeah? So it's not a question of when, yeah? Keep me wrong. Not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I tell you, we can't wait another generation for a massive change in the financial apparatus of our cities, or in terms of how some goods and services are distributed. We need to ramp up different mechanisms to ensure that it's much more community wealth focused. And this document, Good City Economy, and wherever I go, I see many, many examples, yeah? The only problem we have, and it's the biggest, but it can be overcome, it's those that are in power, and then those civil servants and professional classes who are working with those people in power need to get off the old stuff and onto this stuff quickly. Yeah? They need to start bending and disrupting the way they think a city should be run and moving to this. My organisation's never been busier. And it's not because we're brilliant. It's because city officials, city politicians are kind of saying, you know what? There's something in what you're talking about. How do I do it? How do I scale it up? How do I know it would work? What's the governance around it? They're asking these questions. I mean, I've been here for 4 days, right? You know, you get lots and lots of emails. There's other cities coming in and saying, how does this work? This is just growing. We need to get everybody onto this space and start moving. In simple terms, it's an economic plan, has the traditional and the new, and it's seen as equal. Yeah? Keep doing the traditional, but have a whole tranche of stuff that's starting to reimagine the new, and obviously it's been done in terms of some of the procurement and commission stuff I've heard today.
Mm-hmm. So we need a different relation between the center and local authorities, I think, because they need to be capable to have the independence, the autonomy to do all these things. And sometimes, I mean, during the lunch, it was said, no, that cities don't have, are constrained, that they don't have the power to decide many things that affect their local people. So probably there's a need to change the relation with the center.
Certainly, I think the city administration, I think Neil says it well, that the cities need to start shifting from thinking of themselves as provision of services and being the experts on how the city needs to run to becoming more an enabler of civic innovation that's going to happen through citizens that are increasingly more capable and interested in playing a more active role in the quality of life in their city. And I also think, I agree with Neil in the sense that like all the solutions that are needed to sort of transform our economy at a local level are already in existence. They're all over the world. We're seeing it in every city around the world. I mean, Seoul, with leadership from the cities, is the global capital of the sharing economy, but not just the perverted capitalistic version, but also a more cooperative version of the sharing economy. Amsterdam wants to be the sharing capital of Europe, and they're doing pretty well, and Barcelona is coming right behind them. But also, there's this grassroots movement that's manifesting in all different ways in cities around the world. You know, you think about the Occupy movement was maybe one of the first visible examples at a global scale of how this kind of dissatisfaction way the economy is working sort of became a movement. But I think it's becoming real, and we're seeing people really implement solutions at a local level or even at a global level that are really interesting and challenging our paradigms around economy. So I'm really interested in alternative versions of the sharing economy that are more cooperative based or more peer-to-peer, true peer-to-peer based, where the actual value created by the peer is provided back to the peer that created it, rather than a middleman who might be located in Silicon Valley monetizing more of the transaction. But also, even further than that, again, technology is enabling some really radical stuff. Like there's this type of entity called a distributed autonomous organization, which is emerging. It's very early days, and it's based on often kind of blockchain technology, some of you may have heard of. But the long story short of it is, it's actually there's no organization in the middle. It's kind of like a cooperative, but instead of profits being distributed amongst the owners of the cooperative, the revenue that changes hands on a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization platform, goes 100% to the person who created the value. So if you to go from the abstract to the real quick, let's take Uber, right? Uber is not even allowed to operate in Spain. We now have around the world these taxi cooperatives that are responding to Uber by saying we can create the same technology Uber has, but not have to live by Uber's rules. We can create our own rules, but live within the regulatory environment of our city. So there's still licensed, permitted taxis, like in Denver, they created a Denver taxi co-op in Colorado to compete directly with Uber. But go one step further from a taxi co-op, and what you could have is a DAO for taxis. What would a DAO for taxis look like? I open my app, I look for the nearest taxi driver, they pick me up, I get dropped off, my payment goes through the system, but guess what? 100% of my payment goes to the person who drove me, not 90% of it. I don't know how many of you use Halo, I do. I had a long talk with a taxi driver in Barcelona about Halo, who's using Halo, and I didn't know this, but Halo takes 10% of the transaction. And he was telling me that obviously for a taxi driver, 10% of their fare is like pretty much all of their profit. And so they're working on their own model to replicate Halo, but to just have like a DAO in the sense that they would all contribute to the development of an application that taxi drivers in Barcelona could use, but no one would profit from the use of that application. The driver would get all the revenue. There's still some interesting models that emerge around maybe you could actually pay for some of the development of that software, and in return you could maybe get the drivers who want to could get their insurance through you, because you can get a discount on car insurance because you're going to have many drivers using the platform. So there's still models where you could even make money or monetize the platform without taking money from the driver who's delivering the value and the service to the person. So long story there, but I think we're moving. There's all kinds of innovations occurring in the alternative currency movement. We have paper currencies that exist or are emerging around the world. Paris is now pretty far along in launching an alternative local paper currency to facilitate transactions just locally within the city. We have the Makers movement and the Fab Lab movement in cities, the Fab Cities movement. We have cryptocurrencies, which are also another alternative. We have time banking. Time banking is big in Barcelona, as probably some of you know. There's something, I don't know, somebody might know the answer to this, but there's something like 80 different time banks operating just in Barcelona alone. So these are all alternative models that are emerging around the world to sort of react to this perception that capitalism is not helping address things like climate change or inequality and social inclusion.
Mm-hmm. But it's difficult from a local government point of view to know how to regulate all this. I mean, because it's not so easy. You have this catch-all concept of sharing, and I mean, you have different models that are together. So
I agree. I developed a model looking at, a colleague of mine and I explored 36 different business models in the sharing economy. And what resulted from that analysis, we call it the Sharing Business Model Compass. And it's a graphic that actually looks at 6 different decisions that sharing economy entrepreneurs make, and the choices they can make within each of those decisions around what's their role with technology, how do they look at resources, are they trying to optimize new resources or reutilize existing resources, looks at all these decisions and basically says if you choose the decisions on the outside of this thing, you're more likely more like a platform capitalist model. If you choose more on the inside, you're more like a platform cooperative model. And my argument with that is that cities need to get beyond black and white about the sharing economy. The sharing, some people want to say the sharing economy is going to change the world and it's going to save the planet and create social inclusion. And other people say we've got Uber and Airbnb and sharing economy is just another form of capitalism and it's going to kill society. The real truth is somewhere in the middle. But the somewhere in the middle that cities could get into regulating is starting to understand what's underneath these business models and look at encouraging the parts of the business model they want. For example, do we as a city want to encourage the reuse of existing resources, the optimization of existing resources? Therefore, regardless of the business model, if that's part of it, that's something we would likely encourage through some sort of incentive behavior. If it's something that's closer to platform capitalism, like monopolistic behavior, not respecting local regulations and rules and things, then maybe we need to disincent that. And I use one quick example with the Airbnb. In the UK, Airbnb, you know this probably, in the UK they have a tax break for anybody who wants to rent a room in their house over the course of the year for up to £4,000 of revenue generated by renting a room in your house, not renting your house. You had to be occupant of your house and rent an extra room in your house. 4,000 pounds of that revenue is not taxable, so it's free of tax. So what are they doing? Thinking of the way I'm describing the work I've done, what they're trying to do is incent the optimization of underutilized resource. France has a law that says you can only rent your entire apartment for short-term tourist rentals for 120 days a year. What are they doing? They're regulating because they're not optimizing an underutilized resource. They're regulating something they want to discourage. They want to discourage the repurposing of resources that previously were useful for the local community and are now only being used for tourists. So it's the same business model Airbnb, with parts of it being incented and parts of it being disincented. And I think we need to start going to that level of analysis so cities can encourage the right behavior and discourage the bad.
There is something really interesting about how let's, for want of a better word, how we're moving to this distribution or plurality of production, aren't we, in the sharing economy and other ways. And I think that's lending itself to the localization of production, or the more of the intimacy between the producers and the consumers. And what, from a corporate world, I suppose that's, from a private sector perspective, that seems quite advantageous. It breaks up the state, it brings up the monopolies, it breaks up the bureaucracies, and that's quite helpful, I think, if you want to see a weakening of the state role. It strikes me is that there's it's important that we appreciate a plurality of production, a localization of production, a distributed set of producers. But there is the role of the local state, of course, to provide standards, equality, and ways that it would function, and also to perhaps be the enablers of that localized, more atomized set of production that takes place. For instance, in Nottingham, a city in England, there is a whole range of community energy being produced. There's a whole range, schools, individual back gardens. There's a whole range of stuff going on in terms of a range of different forms of energy production. The local authority have set up the Robin Hood, Robin Hood, rich, steal from the rich to give to the poor. They've set up a Robin Hood Energy Company, which is the strategic hub for all that distributed production. Yeah? And that to me seems to be a new business role, a new trading role, a new particular role that a local authority would play. And I don't think it just comes down, energy is a good way of thinking about it. I think it also goes to kind of finance. I think it also goes, and it's happening in UK, English local authorities, think, what about retail? What about owning supermarkets? What about different ways that they can harness their energies to collectivise things that's more a distributed production of stuff that happens locally or in a sea of different organisations beyond the big corporates? This, to me, is more of the progressive agenda for what I'm talking about. This is the progressive wing of the new world we're talking about. And it's a different role, not a shrinking local state, not a smaller local state, but a local state that does different things. It doesn't deliver the services. It allows a range of local and other organisations to deliver those services, and it coordinates and standardises. It doesn't just say, there you go, supermarket, have that nice bit of space and sell your goods. It says, hold on here, there's a range of different goods and services we can have. Why don't we own the supermarket? Yeah, and why don't we make sure that it feeds in local supply chains into it? This is the kind of new public administrative future, I think. A much more interesting one, a much more creative one, a much more imaginative one. That it's not that hierarchy of cause and effect services we will deliver. It's not that kind of bureaucracy, it's a different types of bureaucracy. And it requires different types of behaviours inside of public municipalities. And a different relation with the private sector. Yeah. We need to have quite a few conversations with many bits of the private capitalist economy, rather than having 3 or 4 conversations with big corporates.
The problem sometimes is to compete, no?
Yeah.
Because you're a cooperative or you're a small shop and you cannot do the same. I mean, to open the day, the festivities, and we have a lot of debates in Barcelona about this.
Well,
the problem to compete with other businesses that are...
This is why what measures is what matters. And if we compete on price alone, then the local won't be able to compete. But if we're competing on social value, or local jobs, or carbon footprint, then they possibly can compete more effectively. And so I think it's in the duty of public bodies to ensure, at least with their own spending, that it looks at social value, not just the cheapest, not just the most cost effective, but the most socially and environmentally effective too. And in England we have a Social Value Act, which is a condition upon all municipal authorities to ensure that all their own spending complies, has a social value to it. And some cities have went further and produced social value frameworks that stewards their own procurement and commissioning spend. And if you think about it, in some of the post-industrial cities of the UK, you're talking up to 50% of the economy, 50% of all jobs, 50% of how the economy functions is coming from from taxation and the public purse. I wouldn't know what Barcelona was, but I suspect in terms of public economy, probably somewhere between 25 and 40% of all economic activity is driven by taxation. Somebody's saying roughly that. Yeah. That's democratic money. That's our money. We need to ensure that it's virtuous and provides local jobs, social value, and works within the limits of the environment. Why that money should be spent on global corporates, goodness knows how. It should not be. It should be spent. It's a big enough city to service all of that itself, it seems to me, and it should be. Particularly when you've got poverty that's lasted 40 years in parts of this city. Let's make sure that spend acts socially and virtuously for the people who put the money there in the first place.
I know you're very optimistic in general, but I was wondering to what extent the context of austerity makes it more difficult. I know that it's not a matter of money only, because, I mean, but I suppose that it has an influence, a big influence in what cities can do.
I would say UK, we've had probably up to 50% cuts to our municipal authorities. And that's paying down the deficit, which I think is similar to what's happened in Spanish authorities. There's an irony. On one hand, it's stimulated change because we can't do the same things we used to. We've half our budget cuts in our municipal authorities, so you can't do the same thing. It's stimulated change. That's good. The downside is, we call it slicing and dicing. So it's salami slicing. Maybe you've got the same. What it means is the budget shrinks, yeah? And what you do is you just do less of the same. You don't completely transform and change things. You just do less of the same. Our view, and there's been an autumn statement today in the UK, our view, my organisation's view is austerity was too fast, too deep, and it fettered innovation. It's cut innovation. We need to ease back on austerity to allow innovation to flourish. You can call it an innovation fund, you can do whatever you want, but we are seeing a reduction in innovation because of austerity. So it's a double-edged sword, I think. One hand, it's been okay because it's stimulated change. On the other hand, it's left us to kind of just do a little bit less. I think we need to ease back in austerity. I would also say that the pie that's there, we're talking here about ease back in austerity to make the pie bigger. The pie that's there, even the remaining pie, is not being used effectively. We need to use like the public procurement point, we need to use that pie a lot more cleverly than they have. And also, cities, particularly because of lack of powers, are very bad at harnessing wealth. I'm working with a city at the moment to think about putting in a hotel tax or a land value tax. Seems to me that unless we get a new mean of fiscal income stream to our cities, we're going to be struggling, and we need more powers to do so, it seems to me. Certainly in the UK, I'm not quite sure what the situation is in Spain, but clearly we need to find new ways of harnessing wealth.